is Candace Harris, and I'm the Midwestern Regional Director here at Run for Something. Welcome to our event, Unapologetically Progressive and Native. We're excited to hear from our wonderful candidates. We have a great panel put together for you all tonight. And we're also very thankful for everyone who helped support tonight's event. Thank you to everyone who serves on our National Host Committee, and thank you to all of our sponsors. So some quick housekeeping notes. Make sure that when you're using the chat, we definitely want folks to be engaged and ask questions and talk to each other. Make sure you're changing it to all panelists and attendee or to everyone so everyone can read your comments. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're from, why you're joining, where you're joining from. And at the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session with the panelists. Please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to ask all your questions. That way we can make sure they don't get lost in the chat, and we can definitely let all of our panelists answer all the great questions that you will have. So to talk a little bit more about Run for Something, who we are and what we do. So we have built our program over the last 5 years to do two big things: recruitment and support. And to date, we've recruited more than 75,000 people who are interested in running for office and who have basically raised their hands to say, hey, I'm ready to do this. Our goal is to get more diverse candidates interested in running for office. So we do this through events like tonight, where hopefully there's some folks who are watching who are Indigenous and Native candidates who are thinking about running for office and who are inspired from our panelists. We also do this through digital ads, where we get folks engaged from all different communities. And we also have an event called National Run for Office Day that we kind of treat like a holiday, where we celebrate all the wonderful candidates that we've had step up and run for office and get a lot more folks engaged and excited about the next year to run for office. We also support candidates. After candidates sign up to work with us, they're invited to a candidate intro call that we hold weekly, where me and my fellow regional directors talk to folks. We give them a rundown of what they should be thinking about when they're thinking about stepping up to run for office. And as they continue their journey, we connect them with all the great partner organizations that we work with, lots of resources. And once they're ready, we endorse their campaigns and we continue to support their development even after they're elected. We have a wonderful community of elected alumni and community leaders that we continue to help amplify the work that they're doing in their communities. All of that work that we've been doing has allowed us to endorse more than 1,800 people, and over 600 of them have won. 55% of those folks have been women, 56% of them identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and 21% of them identify as LGBTQIA. And we've endorsed people throughout all 50 states, including Washington, D.C. So that's what we've done, but let's talk about where we're going. So last Tuesday was election day in a lot of places, and we had a wonderful evening. We had a total of 271 diverse young progressives on the ballot, and of that group, 161 of them won. And of those wins, 55% of them identified as Black, Indigenous, people of color, 53% of those wins were women, and 26% of those folks were also members of the LGBTQIA community. And that's what we've just done just this last week. And we have a lot more work to do. And we have a lot more work to keep doing. Two big programmatic shifts that we're going to focus on over the next 2 years are really focusing on those super down ballot local races. So we're going to be looking at municipal races. We're going to be recruiting and supporting candidates, helping them build out policy, helping them run against what we're seeing on the ground as more right-wing GOP candidates step up to run for school board. We're going to make sure that young progressives are able to step up and fight for their communities and fight for the values that they believe in. We know that local candidates make a huge difference, and we know that our local candidates can win. We're also looking into setting up more permanent state-based engagement in a very meaningful way. We're also going to be focusing on supporting our alums. We're going to be using our wonderful, diverse network of alums across the country to do some relational recruitment. So basically, if alums are doing the work in their community, they're leading, and they know of other great young progressive candidates that should be stepping up to run, we want to get them connected to us so we can help them along the way as well. We also want to be focusing on how people can be successful post-election. We have a lot of challenges in all our communities, and we know that our candidates are ready to face them, but we also want to be there to support. We also want to support them as they're thinking about stepping up to run for higher office. How can we continue to amplify their stories, and how can we help them move up the ladder? The question that we keep coming back to is, if Run for Something didn't exist, where would that energy go? Who would raise their hands to step up and do this work? And who would be doing this work in general? Well, the answer is still a bit unclear, but we are even more committed to sustaining it, and we need your help to do so. So for tonight's event, we'll be talking to some amazing Indigenous candidates who have stepped up to run, and we'll talk about how they're creating change in their community. So there were only 2 Indigenous members of Congress as of 2018. Now we have 5, but we still don't have enough representation from this community. The first Native American woman wasn't even elected to Congress to 2018. So we have a lot of work to do in all of our communities to make sure that representation is seen, especially from our Native and Indigenous communities. We also know that when Native and Indigenous candidates run, they win. Of the 114 Indigenous candidates who ran in 2020, 72 of them won, and 67 of those candidates were women. Run for Something is committed to supporting Indigenous candidates from the start of their campaign to the time they're elected and beyond. And we want to see them supported so that their visions of change for their communities can be actualized. So now, I love to introduce our wonderful moderator for this evening. We are happy to have Barbara Bessette. She is a Run for Something alum who represented House District 24 in the Montana State Legislature. Barbara was born and raised in the wide open spaces of Montana. She works in her community to reduce substance abuse among youth and adults. Barbara is actually a barrel racer that knows the value of hard work. She has served as the chair of her county's DUI task force, Get Fit Great Falls, and the Substance Abuse Prevention Alliance. Barbara is enrolled Chippewa Cree and was elected as one of the first urban Native American women in the Montana House of Representatives in 2018. While in the House of Representatives, she served on the House Judiciary and Human Services Committees. Currently, she is in the Tribal Technical Assistance Leader for Youth Connections, where she works with the prevention specialists on tribal lands. She was also named one of KRTV's 5 Under 35 in 2018 for her great work in Great Falls community surrounding substance abuse prevention. Thanks so much for joining us, Barbara, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. I am honored that I get to be the moderator tonight. Run for Something was my very first endorsement in the early 2018, so early in my campaign, and it really was there to help me run and to help me win. And I really think it is very important to get the Indigenous voice not only to the table, but out so everyone else can hear it. And that's the reason I ran, is because you weren't hearing my voice at the table and the voice of how prevention looks, the health disparities of Indigenous people. And that's why I decided to run, and Run for Something was pivotal in that race. In 2020, unfortunately, I was not as successful, but that's what happens. You win some and you lose some. And I will be running again in 2022. So I am going to now introduce our amazing panelists, and I'm very excited. So up first, we have April Fournier. April is a strong Indigenous Dene woman, a mother, an educator, and a fierce advocate for her community. April actively works to eliminate barriers to participation in government and education. She works to ensure that those most often marginalized within the community are included in conversations that impact them directly. April is currently serving as an at-large Portland City Councilor because she believes that her city needs someone committed to protecting the environment, including all community members in conversations, meeting community members where they are at, and ensuring community members have what they need to thrive: affordable housing, equitable education, secure access to food and living wages, and a counselor who is accessible, engaged, and willing to create space for them in the conversation. She also serves on the finance and legislative and nominating committees. Thank you, April. All right, up next, we have a fellow Montanan, Jacob Torgerson. Jacob Torgerson is a Democratic candidate for the Montana House of Representatives, District 81. Jacob is a gay urban Native American who grew up in a working class blue collar family of 7. He was born and raised right here in Helena, which I'm in Great Falls, but born and raised in Helena, and is a product of Helena's public schools, as well as an active organizer in the Helena community. Jacob comes from a family of small business owner and is a food service industry employee at a small business. He is also in his 2nd year as a student at Helena College. As a legislature, Jacob plans to passionately advocate for working families, young people, women, and LGBTQI+ community. And I look forward to serving with Jacob. Thanks, Jacob. All right, up next and our final panelist, last but not least, is Justice Horn. Justice Horn is a social justice advocate, political consultant, campaign surrogate, community organizer, and public speaker. He is running to serve Jackson County's 1st district on the Jackson County Legislature. He's a young Missourian running to be the first openly gay person of color elected to local office in Kansas City, Missouri. Justice plans to bring equity, accountability, and community to Jackson County. He believes that the path forward to achieve equity is to empower everyone in our community. A native Missourian, Justice is a class of 2020 graduate of University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he served in many advocacy roles such as student body president. He also currently serves as a community advisor to the White House Office of Public Engagement's Black Stakeholder Group and vice chair of the Kansas City LGBTQ+ Commission, among others. So welcome, Justice. So I have a question for each of the panelists. First up, April, I have a question for you. So April, you won your election last year. Congratulations. That's amazing. I remember watching you actually on social media, so it's great. Because I always try to follow Run for Something alum or, people. So what was the biggest lesson you learned from campaigning? And off of that, what do you wish someone had prepared you for?
That's a great question. Thank you. So in my campaign, it was right after COVID hit. So COVID hit in March, took out papers in June, and everything was closed. So all of the strategies that we learn that we know work, hitting the pavement, doing doors, talking to constituents, all of those things really weren't accessible. And so we had to get really creative with leveraging social media. So, getting a Twitter page going, getting an Instagram page going, getting a Facebook page going, and just really trying to build momentum and a following just from the natural connections I've had, within the community. I'm a parent. My kids have been in the school system for the last 15 years where, I've been a homeowner here in Portland for more than a decade. I've done work in just some different circles. So really building on those coalitions helped get some of the word out, and really just asking people for their help and saying, I need to get, 350 signatures to be able to qualify to be on the ballot. Who can meet me at the end of their driveway? I will come to you in my minivan. And I'm happy to come and get those signatures. And we ended up having these little almost neighborhood signature parties where someone would say, hey, I live at this street. I'm happy to come out and sign with my spouse. And hey, I'll see if I can grab our neighbors too. And so it really became this really cool, just energy building movement in the middle of this really terrible thing that we were also all experiencing together. And so I was able to get the signatures, but gosh, the things that I didn't know going into it was just the one time you have to make sure that you're dedicating to campaigning, because especially if you're an at-large candidate, So Portland has 5 different districts that we serve, and then we have 3 at-large counselors. So Portland only has 66,000 people, but that's still 66,000 people to try and get motivated to vote. Luckily, it was a presidential year as well as a Senate year. So there were lots of people already looking to the polls and getting out to the polls. So that helps some of the momentum. But really just trying to balance, family obligations, work obligations, because campaigning and serving in office don't really pay you enough to live on. So making sure that you can balance all of those things. I think people sometimes will tell you, yeah, make sure you set aside some time. They don't always tell you how much time. So if you're getting ready to run for office, one, get a really good group behind you that are going to support you, because you cannot do it all yourself as the candidate. You will be exhausted. So having a very strong campaign team with people who are just ready to help remind you to eat, remind you to get some good sleep, and help organize things, because really you can't keep track of it all yourself. And when you get elected into office, it's the same thing. You can't shoulder it all yourself. So it really takes community. So building those early community connections is huge, because that almost then naturally built a volunteer network of people who are really excited, and still to this day are excited to help when there are things that I need to get done. So
I think that's all really great advice for anyone that's thinking of run. Thank you so much for that. All right, Jacob, I have, you are my next person. So as a gay and urban Native candidate running for state legislature, what do you think is going to be your biggest challenge?
Thank you for the question, Barb. I live in Helena, which is by all standards one of Montana's historic progressive strongholds. And, I recognize that I have the privilege of running in a much friendlier political environment than some of our progressive Native brothers and sisters, Barb. A lot of them actually happen to be aggressively gerrymandered into ultra-conservative districts or into majority white districts. However, where I'm running, there is a good old boys club, and really they control the game. They hold all of the cards. So running as a unapologetically progressive, young, gay, urban Native American candidate who demands fundamental change to our status quo, it isn't very easy. Proving to these establishment folks that we need and deserve big, meaningful change, it's difficult on its own. And doing it as a young gay person of color, that doesn't make it any easier. So I think the biggest challenge I'm facing and have faced is convincing these, those establishment folks who are content with the status quo, that the way things used to work in Montana no longer work. And especially not for working people, for people of color, young people, and so many more marginalized groups.
Thanks, Jacob. I know that you are working very hard already in your campaign. All right, and Justice, your question. If you win, you would be the first gay person of color to be elected in Kansas City, following the historic win of the first Black mayor of Kansas City. What do these historical elections mean for your community?
Yeah, so first I want to say thank you for inviting me here, and I appreciate spending tonight with so many phenomenal people and sharing this platform. But I would say first off, representation. It is absolutely important that local government, state government, and federal government look exactly like the community it's meant to serve. So I think for a long while, we haven't had representation, and that is absolutely important, not only to agenda set, to advance priorities in communities, but as well as defend a lot of the important issues that are important to all of us. There's a saying here in the Midwest that if you're not at the table, you're usually on the menu.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too when I was saying needing to have a seat at the table. So you picked that right out of my brain, Justice. Well, great. I think this is going to be a great panel. Thank you so much for answering those. So now we're going to move on where I'm going to ask the question, and then we will rotate through each of you. We're just going to do it with the April, you'll be first, and then I'll rotate it for the next few questions. So you're not always first. All right, we'll just go in the order we just did, and then we'll start rotating. All right. So April, the Native community is vastly underrepresented and marginalized. How do you stay motivated in the face of this inequality?
Awesome, thank you. And I, on the council, vote first every time. So I'm used to going first, and that's okay because I'm setting the stage, right?
That's right.
So I remember actually when I started playing roller derby. I am now retired, but I played for 7 years. And so it's a very white sport. And I was absolutely amazed to see one of the top players was Native, and they were from my tribe. So they were Dene, and they were living in New York City. So we historically are in the Southwest. So seeing another member of my tribe on my coast was amazing. And so I reached out to them just to share how important it was for me to see someone like me in that space where I was really underrepresented. And then a few years into the sport, I started to have other skaters reach out to me with the same gratitude and admiration, which was just phenomenal. And then now it's happening as I've won my race and as I've started to serve in office. And so just being able to be progressive and Native, serving in this space, existing, thriving, growing, but being able to do all of that while being my authentic self in this space has just been amazing. And then it's helped inspire others to run, to volunteer, and just to get involved because we're creating space for others, which is just incredible. So my motivation really is continuing to learn how not only do we recruit and elect Natives to office, but how do we support them to keep us in office, once we get here.
I think that's a great point of how do we recruit and then how do we keep them? And I think seeing people like you in office is really empowering to all of us. So thank you so much. All right, Jacob, same question. And do you need me to restate it or are you good?
I'm good, Barb.
Okay, great.
I stay motivated by focusing on how far we have come in, with Native representation. I mean, we have several members of Congress who are Native American, and the Biden administration made history when they appointed Deb Haaland as Secretary of the Interior. She is a Laguna Pueblo woman. She was the first Native to be a member of any presidential cabinet. So seeing other Native activists like April and like Justice succeed, that really is what keeps me motivated in this.
Great. And yes, when Auntie Deb won, when she won in 2018, and then I actually got the privilege to meet her. And when I met her, I cried.
Oh, I would too.
So I think seeing those and Sharice Davis too, that's definitely, they're great role models for all of us. Thank you so much. All right, Justice.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. And here locally, right across the state line, that's Sharice Davis district. So that's a little home for me. I think what keeps me motivated would be without a doubt community. I think there is, something in saying both our local indigenous community as well as our tribal leaders here in Jackson County. There's been a lot of issues of, losing hope and them having hope in our campaign and wanting to change the face of local politics as well as the issues. There's not even been a person who has been a champion of those issues. Jackson County is, has its namesake from Andrew Jackson, who was not only a slave owner, but was the infamous architect of the Trail of Tears. He's never set foot in Jackson County, but the county is named after him, as well as in our downtown courthouse and our Independence Courthouse have a humongous Andrew Jackson statue that puts him on a pedestal. So it's issues like that, our community members, no matter their background, should be walking in the buildings that put a man of his stature on any high horse. So, that is both a symbolic and policy gesture. And that's, I think a lot of people know day one, I'm going to introduce legislation to take that down.
Oh, that's really great. That actually reminded me, in the 2019 session, we passed to have all of our tribal flags fly at our state capitol. So that reminds me a lot of that, where it makes it feel more welcome for people. So, well, I hope you get that done. Good luck on that. That's a great goal. I like that a lot. So thank you for sharing that. All right, we'll move on to the next one. So Jacob, I'm going to ask you first, and then we'll go to Justice and then to April. Do you feel like there is more pressure on you to represent the Native community as a candidate? And what challenge do you face that your counterparts don't?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the pressure mostly comes from doing our community justice and, trying to bridge that gap between urban Native Americans and those on the res. I found a challenge that I face that, my counterparts might not, is being taken seriously as a candidate in the first place. It's not easy for a racially homogenous establishment to just accept this young gay Native guy who is, really pushing the need for big structural change into the forefront.
Sorry, couldn't find my unmute button.
Yeah. Woo, go hard.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Jacob. Have you seen any of that so far in your race? So that you've been, because I know you've been working. So
yeah, not from people on the doors, from more so people who are already established in the political community. I get a lot of, and why are you qualified?
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous questions like that.
Yeah, I think I also, sorry, my cat. I love working from home. I apologize. He never does that. So I also had a little bit of that pushback too. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that's something that a lot of people that are watching might feel like that's what they're going to experience. But knowing that there's places like Run for Something to go to, and other Natives that have ran across the country to go for. So thank you. All right, Justice, same question.
Yeah, so I would say without a doubt, but that is kind of the pressure that comes with seeking office. I think, and it's very clear, I'm seeking to represent District 1 here in Jackson County. But when you represent so much more than yourself, especially communities, and especially if you're elected to make history, that is something that is felt throughout Jackson County, throughout the state of Missouri, and throughout the nation. It gives a lot of hope to a lot of people. So I think the pressure is always there, but it's always, important to know that what little pain you're feeling, there were people who were willing to die for this, people who blazed a trail for us even to attempt to run for office and to hopefully win. So our minor uncomfortable feeling could never attest to what our ancestors had to go through to even get us here.
Yeah, I really like that you said that. We're all products of, our ancestors and what they went through. And I often try to think of that as well, of like the fact that we're even here is a testament to those ancestors. And, my great-great-grandpa probably couldn't even understand, who only spoke Cree, could never imagine that his great-great-granddaughter would ever serve in the legislature. So I think that's a really important point.
And that's one thing I've always been proud of our community, is with everything stacked against us, or we're a resilient community. I mean, we have a fighting spirit, and that's something I've always been proud of us for having. But you go ahead, April. I'm sorry for jumping in.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. All right, April.
Yeah, thank you. And echo everything that's already been said, really. I think, there is, for us, as a result of generations of assimilation, attempted genocide, dehumanization, there's this idea that non-natives have about us, about how we should be, what we should look like, how we should behave. But like every other culture, we're all so different. There's not one right way to be Native or to look Native. So I think I have additional pressure on me and a responsibility as an elected Native to shoulder what I can, because just as Justice mentioned, there's so many generations of shoulders that we're standing on that went through so much to allow us to be here. So if I can do anything to create visibility for issues for the community that, for the land that I occupy, I'm not living on my tribe's land, I'm living on a different tribe's land. Whatever I can do to bring those issues forward, I see that is my responsibility, and that does add some additional pressure. But I also see it as a privilege to be able to take this space to shoulder those issues and really fight to create more space for even more Native voices.
Oh, I really just love what you said there. I felt all of that as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. All right, our next one, Justice, I'm going to start with you this time. If you could do just one thing to create a safer space for the Native community in your district, what would you do?
Yeah, so I would, tear down symbols of oppression that are both tangible and intangible at Jackson County. I just could never fathom, and it's a long history of those who have tried to write our history and very much put those who were oppressors in a different light, and we have national conversations about our history going on. But I would say the taking down of both Andrew Jackson statues, as well as looking at a lot of our, racially insensitive, teams. I have a lot of pride for our sports team, but there's also the Kansas City Chiefs right here in my district. Both the Royals and the Chiefs are in my district. So I would first start off by, taking down tangible symbols of white supremacy and racism, because only then can we start to heal and have these conversations on how do we further make this community equitable and make sure everyone feels seen. We can't do that with Andrew Jackson appearing over our shoulders.
Yes, I totally agree. I love it. All right. So next will be April.
Awesome. Yeah. Yes, to all the sports teams. But I think this is a really interesting question because I don't know that I could have just one solution. It's really kind of that multidimensional approach. So if we're going to create safety, it's really creating an understanding that first and foremost, Native peoples are human. We're the first inhabitants of this land. We're the keepers of so much knowledge. We still exist. We're not mascots. We're not objects. We're not costumes. We are sacred. So one of the things I'm hoping to do just on a local level is restarting a Native student and families group in our city that was just getting started as the pandemic hit, but it's a space that's intended to bring families in the city together to gather, share traditions, pass on those cultural connections, feel like we have a community that is safe and ours, but creating that space again for families to just grow and thrive and find each other, I think is one way that we can at least create some safety because we're creating that community, we're creating those connections so we don't feel as isolated and as alone, not only by the pandemic, but just by the unfortunate community design that we have.
Oh, that's a great idea. Love it. Love for places for people to come together. All right, and finally, Jacob.
Okay, so Helena, we've actually had some development on racial issues in the last couple of years. We used to have what was a Confederate monument here in town, and since I believe it was 2018 or 2019, they removed it and replaced it with a racial unity fountain. And I think that is an amazing step in the right direction, and I applaud our city commission for doing that. One thing that I would personally do is elevating the issues Natives are facing, truly helping white people understand the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous folks and women in specific. That is one of my utmost priorities. I also want to focus on getting more urban Natives involved in the process and finally giving them a seat at the table in Helena politics, because currently they have been pushed aside by the powers that be. I pledge that when I'm elected, that will change.
Thank you so much, Jacob. And just about that, the Confederate Monument in Montana, just I find it
Right.
interesting. We're very far from the South.
Very far from the South, in fact.
So-
We're actually, Helena is named after a city in the South, I guess. Helena, Georgia or Alabama or something, but
That's very interesting. So, all
Right.
right, we will start with April for this next one. In the spirit of celebrating Native Heritage Month, what is something about being part of the Native community that you are most proud of and brings you the most joy?
I love this question. I think for me, it is just celebrating our resilience. There have been so many efforts to erase us, to forget us, to target us, to make us invisible. But the fact that we keep coming back, we continue to rise. We are finding more and more people who are running for office, who are stepping up in their communities. We're starting to see this beautiful celebration of being Indigenous in the arts through different shows like Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls. And we're seeing Native culture now come out in fashion and in art. So this incredible resilience that we demonstrate as a people, and we are all different tribes in different corners of the world, but we still are just rising together. And it just feels like it's an incredible moment to be living through and to be serving in office during this time. But I think for all of us, it's not just Native Heritage Month, it's every month, because every morning we wake up, we're Native, and we get to celebrate that. We get to continue to demonstrate that resilience for the generations that came before us and the generations that are coming after us. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to stay visible. We're going to make sure that our history is accurate and remembered.
It always reminds me of smoke signals. It's a great day to be Indigenous.
Yes.
All right. So Jacob, same question for you.
yeah, so something that really makes me proud to be Native and that brings me joy is the fact that we have a truly caring culture that puts down no one, and we truly respect our sacred land and the animals that inhabit it. I'd say that our undying energy is also something that gives me joy. Seeing all of these young Indigenous activists fight for what they believe in really gives me hope for our culture's future,
Yeah, definitely. It's really great to see.
Yeah, shout out to Hannah Pate, because she is an Indigenous activist in Montana who she gives me hope all of the time. She is amazing, incredible.
Same. I'm trying to get her to run for office someday. So I'm always working on that. All right, Justice.
Yeah, so I completely agree, especially with the sentiment said before about our resiliency. I think one thing, and this is something that's happening with LGBTQ History Month to Black History Month, as well as Native American Heritage Month, is that we've always been here and we're not going anywhere. And I know that people are starting to finally uplift us, but we've always been here. We've been a part of American history, even though they've tried to rewrite history in some way, but our people have always been here and continue to embrace everyone. I also don't live on my native land. I live on the Osage Nation land here in the Midwest. And what's actually funny, my native tribe, the Blackfeet Nation, most of their territory is in Montana, up in the Canada. So I think it's always us understanding where we are and even paying homage to the other Indigenous tribes whose lands we also occupy. So always honoring those around us.
Yes, great. And Blackfeet, yep, that's just about 2 hours north of where I am. So the two representatives from there became really good friends of mine during the session. So great. All right. So next question, Jacob, I'm going to start with you. What is something you wish more people knew or understood about the Native community?
So I wish more people, had more context. I wish that more people understood the deep, dark history that the United States government has and how their actions have deeply hurt our people. It is no wonder that counties containing reservations happen to be the poorest and have the lowest human index or human development index in the country. Our tribal nations are stuck in an impoverished state because of a colonialist government's crimes against humanity and bad faith. I wish more people in Montana specifically knew about the Marius Massacre, which is where the U.S. Army massacred about 200 Blackfeet men or Blackfeet children and women and elders, you know, completely peaceful, defenseless. These natives were promised protection by our government, actually, at this camp. They were promised protection, and they were ambushed and just slaughtered like animals. You know, our poverty is a product of hundreds of years of oppression. It is not because it's not because we are lazy or because we don't have, you know, the energy to get out of the poverty that we have been forced into.
Yeah, thank you. That the Marias Massacre, it's up in Shelby, which is not very far from me either.
Yep.
And I have a friend who went to school in Shelby, Montana, and he didn't even know that it ever happened until like a few years ago. So yes, that was spot on. Thank you. All right. And finally, April.
I had to find my unmute button too. So I think for me, you know, one thing I wish that people just really recognized about the Native community is, I said it before a little bit, we're all colors, shapes, sizes, personalities. There's no one way to be Native. Each of our journeys is authentic. Each of our experiences are vastly different. My mother was taken from the Diné Reservation in the 60s, and she grew up in Southern California with white parents. And so she didn't grow up with the benefit of her culture, her language, or her family. She didn't really learn her traditions, so she couldn't pass those on to my sister and I. So we're learning as adults and reclaiming our identity, and our experience is just as valid and as authentic. So I think we share common bonds as a Native community, but we are all very different. So when we see things like mascots, caricatures, or costumes, that just perpetuates this belief that we're all one thing or we all look one way. So it's so important for us to continue to work to actively change that narrative.
I'm really glad that you said that you're trying to reclaim your, and I am in the same boat too. I didn't grow up on the res, and my stepdad is white. And so, you know, trying to reclaim that and figure those out. And my mom is Little Shell, and they just became federally recognized, so they didn't really have any land. So I really think that's important. Thank you. A lot of us share that same feeling. So thank you so much for saying that. All right. So Justice, this time we're going to start with you. So our supporters always ask, how can we help more Native candidates running for office? If you could give them one piece of advice on how to help these candidates, what would it be?
Yeah, so I would say, without a doubt, supporting the Native candidates that have stepped up. I think one thing that I've even learned here locally, and this is because of my youth, but I'm a fighter, I'm a young buck. But one thing that you have to understand is if you truly know, especially here locally, the Indigenous community, is that it takes time and it takes trust. So if you're a non-Indigenous, non-Native person, you can't just come to them and say, run for office. It is, and they have rightfully so to be cautious of any outsider coming in and telling them what to do. So first, you know, supporting those and us that have stepped up, and two, building trust with your local Indigenous communities. Wherever you are, you can not only get in touch with your local tribal leaders, Indigenous communities, but know what land you're standing on, whose land that has been stolen that you are living on and occupying. So support us, educate yourself, and get involved with those locally. So, and understanding that it takes time, and rightfully so.
Yeah, great advice. April.
Thank you. Yeah, this is something I think about a lot. I think supporting Native candidates, not only before, but after the campaign too. Having Black and Indigenous people of color campaign staff who know the issues that Natives would encounter on the campaign trail and once they get into office. So it's very different to be a minority running for and winning office. Not everyone is psyched you're there and they don't always agree with the priorities that you might bring to the table. And so for me, am I going to correct anyone every time I hear let's powwow about it, or nuts off the reservation, or oh, you're so savage? or use genocidal terms like Trail of Tears, comparing it to their own minor misfortunes, I'm going to correct them every time. I want to do that education, but I have learned through this process, not everyone appreciates being educated, whether they're elected colleagues or the public. So I think helping candidates and those that have been elected into office be prepared for some of those hard conversations that they may not have ever had to navigate before, just in their daily lives. I think when you get elected into office or you're running for office, you are in the spotlight. So you do sometimes become a target. And so being prepared for, how do I deal with conflict? How do I deal with that back and forth? How do I deal with media if it comes out and it's negative about me or it's attacking me? How do I deal with internet trolls that are, making comments or disparaging remarks about me or my identity? I think we also need to make sure that these spaces are safe spaces. And that means that when we have, these big national political machines that are really excited about our identities, saying, I want to have the first Native, or give me a Native to come join this thing, recognize that there's a difference and a deficiency in support for us as candidates and us as elected officials, but also making sure that we have money and resources to be able to run these races.
Yeah, so I want to jump in real quick here too, and I appreciate the knowledge and expertise you bring to this, April. But I think that also needs to be stated too, and this is something that was well known, and I led a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests here locally in Kansas City. But what we do need right now is for allies to speak up. I mean, there doesn't need to be an Indigenous person in the room for you to speak up. So being an ally, being an accomplice when we're not in the room, that's when we need you the most. I think what we do too much, and I know the question was posed to us, but a lot of this work is put on people of color to fight these fights. And I think as allies, that's where we could use y'all the most. But go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justice. All right, Jacob.
Yeah, so, how we can help, or how somebody looking to help, Indigenous candidates, something that they could do is support them in primaries, be vocal about your support in primaries, because I've seen many, Indigenous candidates go down, amazing Indigenous candidates go down in primaries or tough general elections because they weren't, they didn't have the funding or the support that they needed. So, phone bank for these candidates, knock doors for them, or, organize for them, because without that help, I mean, they're just doing it on their own. And really that is very difficult. Show them that you want to help, because I'm more than sure that we'll be very welcoming. We will, we'll take all the help we can get, really.
All right, great. Thank you so much. All right, so we are going to now go to the Q&A from the audience. And I am just going to pull it up, and whoever wants to jump in, or if you guys want to piggyback off of each other, let me know. So I'm going to start with the first one.
Are these Q&A that are in the question box? Because there were some that were directed to us in the chat too.
Oh, there are some in the chat. I have the Q&A box up. So I'll try to also go through those as you guys are answering these. So, all right. So from Juneteenth to National Indigenous Heritage Month to Black History Month, how can we how can we move away from posturing performance and gravitate towards substantial material reparations in all of its forms of repairing harms to BIPOC?
Yeah, so I'll take that on that a little bit.
Great.
You have to understand these are very complex and tough issues, especially to the general public. One thing, and I completely agree, is kind of these symbolic gestures that actually aren't helping the community. But for a lot of community, especially our Indigenous community, we're so behind the buck that we haven't even gotten recognition. So I think that it's absolutely important that we're starting there, as well as, and just a little politics I've been in my life is, you have to prime the public and educate the public on these issues. What we did first here in Kansas City was first recognize Trans Day of Remembrance, and then we started talking about how our healthcare system better reflects and embraces those communities. We then passed Juneteenth here locally, which then primed the public for actual Black policies and the conversation of reparations at the county level, as well as finally recognizing Indigenous people.
Are you still there? Or is it just me?
No, I think you froze for me too.
Oh, okay. Does anyone want to take that? Oh, he's back. He's back. I
Yay!
love technology.
Oh,
We just
and
roll with it.
I was just gonna say, and lastly, finally recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day over Columbus Day as how we actually talk about changing our systems to support our communities, especially when we talk about the climate crisis. Our community have been, experts in how to take care of our land and our environment. So, yeah, sorry for freezing. I just wanted to say those things.
Yeah, I would absolutely piggyback on what Justice said. I think so. In this first year in office, my primary goal was to create proclamations that recognized Indigenous Peoples Day, that recognized, missing and murdered Indigenous women and Children's Day, that recognized the National Day for Boarding School Remembrance. And it was really because there's so many deficiencies within our educational system. So there is a history that we've all lived that no one has ever talked about. And so in order for us to really make policy change that is going to stick, that's going to actually be something that will happen and be continued, you have to start with that education piece first. And I know it's painful. I know it feels performative, but I have found in every organizing space that I've ever been in, whether it was education, roller derby, or now local politics, the education piece is so big because you have to build coalitions. You have to build people that are, okay, I get where you're coming from. Now I can start to hear why we need to make this change. So until you can start to get people understanding, you even have to sometimes start from the ground up on terminology, on history, and then you can start to build on how we make some of those changes. So it does definitely feel performative sometimes, but it is that education foundation we have to start from in order to go anywhere else.
I just have to say, I love that you did roller derby. But yeah, I think it is really important to build some capacity. Jacob, do you have anything to say? If not, we can go on to the next one.
Yeah, I have a little bit to say. And I think that one of the most important things that governments can be doing is investing in tribal communities, because, they are very much kind of isolated from the economic development, at least in Montana, that has been happening. I mean, Montana has been exploding. Montana has really grown in the past 5 years-ish, and it's been kind of centered around heavily white areas. And so I think that one of the best things that we can do, at least in Montana, is further fund projects, or at least allow tribal nations the money, grant money or something like that, for them to invest in their communities. You're muted, Barb.
Yes, great. Thank you. You would think I haven't been doing this for 2 years. All right. So our next question is, have any of the candidates had pushback or attacks from local Indigenous constituents that are either heavily assimilated into conservatism or are just salty about a non-local Native running? And if so, what were some of the tactics to turn those conversations?
I have not experienced that, but I think a lot of it really comes back to getting to know your community. And for me, as a Native who is not on my native land, it's showing deference to the tribes whose land you do occupy. And so it's getting to know who are some of the tribal leaders that are working in the same circles that I'm working, what are their priorities? How can I use my office to elevate those conversations or push forward those conversations? For here in Maine, the Wabanaki Confederacy, a lot of the tribes are farther north of Portland, but are advocating for different changes to state policy, working on tribal sovereignty. So those are things that I can continue to include in my local conversations as we're building proclamations, as we're doing that ground education. Those are ways that I think you can include the local tribes to make sure that those voices are being heard and elevated while you're occupying that space. Thankfully, I haven't had anyone who's been salty about me being here. But I think it's also creating that open space for conversation and saying, if you have questions, if you have concerns, I am happy to hear both. And I think just having that approach definitely makes for open dialogue, which is really important.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, we do have one more question that I want to get to, and I'm going to kind of change it a little bit. And it's actually probably more for Justice and Jacob, because winners in elections in Missouri, and I'm also going to say Montana, tend to be conservative. How do you plan to appeal to conservatives?
Yeah, so that's tough. A lot of my political history, especially in running politics, was in 2016 in West Virginia, a Republican stronghold, as well as when I went to college, South Dakota, and running a governor's race, and now to Missouri, a ruby red state where U.S. Senator Josh Hawley hails from, as well as Eric Greitens. So one thing, it's tough. Jackson County is a Democratic county, but it is a bubble and a sea of red. You have a supermajority in state legislature. The Republicans control everything. So in appealing to Republicans, I would say it would be messaging. I think when we talk about big issues I care about, like a countywide transit system, no matter if you're inner city, Kansas City, to a rural part, Eastern Jackson County, that's jobs and investment on your main street. Or when you talk about access to healthcare, that is urban core out to the rural part, as well as access to broadband. So a lot of the issues I care about are things I think we can all get behind. And these are issues that shouldn't be partisan issues. And that's also work on us to bring people along. It's tough because I'm not just a Democrat, I'm a progressive. And we don't, it's usually human rights are the first thing on the chopping blocks when tangoing with conservatives. So we'll see. I'm a candidate now that we'll see.
Oh no, I get you. I'm from Montana. I'm glad at least we have John Tester. So, all right, Jacob.
Yeah. So personally, I am not particularly trying to appeal to any, political group. I'm trying to really fight for what working families in my district are telling me. Universal childcare. It is a popular proposal. I just saw a poll today, actually. 66% of Americans, they approve and want universal childcare. Affordable housing, it is a crisis in Montana, and affordable housing is something that my constituents deeply care about. That is an issue that I deeply care about because of it. And paid family and medical leave, the Family Act, as an elected representative, I will fight to pass the Family Act in Montana. So these issues are the reason that I am running. And I don't know that particularly conservative people will appreciate it, but I know what my constituents are telling me, and I know what their concerns are. And that is what, fuels at least my politics.
All right. Well, thank you. Oh, did you have something else, Justice?
I would just say it's messaging as well. Yeah. And I completely agree with Jacob because here recently, I got Chick-fil-A kicked out of our airport here in Kansas City for our bid. And, as an LGBTQ person and a Democrat, they funded a lot of, initiatives and candidates who are anti-LGBTQ who continue to stop the passage of the Equality Act. And my messaging was this national chain is taking a spot from our local small business, and we should all fight behind that. Myself, I don't like Chick-fil-A because they're anti LGBTQ, but that's messaging on supporting local business, supporting small business and your neighbor is what you need to make sure you have broad messaging. So it's a coalition building, and that's what it's about.
Well, thank you so much. I am going to now hand it back to Candace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you so much, April, Justice, and Jacob. Like, that was amazing. Some things that I just wrote down. I remember a few of y'all mentioning like resilience. I think that's so important, representation in all different forms. You all are here, you all are running, and we are happy to help you all run and represent your communities. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was a great discussion. Thank you again to everyone who joined us, who's still on the call. Thank you for your questions and your input. Thank you again to our host committee and to all of our sponsors. Act Blue, Ask Me, Onward Together, Authentic Campaigns, Emily's List, Lim Consulting, Precision Strategies, Amalgamated Bank, Avalanche Insights, Civic Analytics, and New Code. Thank you all so much for helping make this program a great one. Again, we are here at Run for Something to run and help recruit and support all of these candidates. We want to help recruit even more Native leaders. Please help us by doing so by donating. runforsomething.net /build. I think we're going to drop the link in the chat now. We want to make sure that we can see more candidates like our panelists and our hosts run. I think a few of the candidates mentioned some things. Yeah, when you see Native candidates or when you see candidates that you resonate with these issues that have been talked about tonight, volunteer, give your time, give your money, give your treasure, help them run and win. And that's how we build movement in our communities. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.